Professionalizing the public service has once again come under the spotlight at the Kgalema Motlanthe's Dialogue Among Equals on Sunday, where chairperson of the commission, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, highlighted the importance of state capacity. Now, Fikeni told the gathering that politicians need to come to grips with the complexity of state administration and oversight. He joins us now for more on that. Prof, good to have you. Thank you very much for your time this evening. A political school being made mandatory in the ANC, but an overhaul of the membership enrollment system also being added there. Is that the gap that we need to close as far as the professionalizing of politics and, of course, what you are calling for the professionalizing of public service or the capacitation of state?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Our main focus is the professionalization of public service. But we raised the issue even during the national dialogue of coalition on coalitions to say, would it be possible or even asymmetric to have professionalization of public service without ever attempting to do similar capacity building and even thresholds and filters for the space of public office bearers and politicians for that matter? 30 years into our democracy, when education has relatively been free and many bursaries made available, can we still use the issue of a disadvantaged background for people who are relatively younger to say they couldn't get an opportunity to get to school? Because the complex issues over which oversight is exercised, just like the complex issues over which public servants have to deal with, people have to have those requisite skills. That's where this comes in. And that is different from political education, which is dealing more about the effects of history and probably consciousness about that or that liberation movement. In this case, we're talking about the issue of just technical capacity as well as a moral code that comes with that, generally for public service, for those who are doing oversight over them.
Yeah. So in simple terms, when you're putting it, you're saying, well, you have a politician looking over engineers that have got to do with water challenges, for example, that are in the country. But that particular politician has no engineering background, in a sense, to be able to effectively conduct that oversight over an engineer. So a process where we are saying, come, let's teach you about the history of the ANC and so on and so forth, is not necessarily going to help us there. So what should we instead be doing at political party level to be able to get the kind of political professionalization that translates into the professionalization of state?
Actually, I would dare say that it shouldn't even be focusing on political parties and their internal democracy and dynamics, but more to say, what qualifies one to become a parliamentarian, to become a ward councillor, to sit in this or that committee, and the kind of oversight they are holding over that particular group of people. Let's say if it is the Minister of Electricity and some of the officials who are experts in energy, what kind of people should be doing oversight or providing strategic direction to that? If you're in a municipality and you do have councillors who sometimes would do oversight or even provide strategic direction, where you deal with water engineering, with civil engineering, with a lot of new technologies, including your AI and many other things that are to be factored in now, what kind of technical requisite skills would be needed at the level of basic level of comprehension and education? Hence, in Kenya, you do even have a threshold as to who could be applying for those positions. Of course, we will leave that to Parliament, to politicians to deal with. But our main focus will always be with public service, whilst we are signaling that even the oversight over public service. Not only just political leaders, we've put the same condition and stringent conditions for people who become commissioners or even people who could become members or leaders in the Chapter 9 institutions, because with the sophistication of statecraft, you need an equally sophisticated and well-equipped people to deal with those.
This, of course, also including those who are playing a supportive role in the office of ministers. You're saying there should be no exception even for those, and quite commending, I suppose, the position or posture taken by the Minister of Public Service, but could be maybe tightened and reinforced even more.
Certainly, remember that people who are in the private office of ministers, your chief of staff, people who are heading the offices and so forth, are the layer around the minister. And therefore, they provide sound advice to the minister if they are technically equipped, if they are educationally equipped. If they do not have that, and the minister will seek advice from those who are in the private office in order to respond to issues coming from the department, there is a disjuncture there, and there is an asymmetry where one side may have very weak advice, and some of these decisions made would be based on that. That's why being strict on who gets to the private office, who will be advising, who sometimes become gatekeepers, who become advisors and so forth, it's equally important to stick to the requirements and the qualification. Because once you give this exception, it becomes a slippery slope, and it becomes what was an exception becomes a norm.
Currently, Prof, you're engaged in a 3-day strategic workshop on the implementation of the professionalization of public service framework. And you also raised the question, I suppose, of the austerity measures and how that is affecting your work. Are you able to successfully carry out these interventions with the kind of budgets that you have, considering how expanded your mandate has now been to include municipalities, SOEs, employees of parliament, and so on and so forth?
There is no doubt that the fiscal constraints are a reality, and we need to deal with that. But at the same time, if this is applied and standardized right across, you run a risk of using a lawnmower to cut grass, to cut weed, to cut the very vegetables that you may want, if you just use one tool, one approach. There are certain areas which are beginning to assist the very state to return some of its funds. Sometimes this might be law enforcement, this might be public protector's office, it might be different entities that are beginning to unlock. Look at the issue of the medical legal claims now, with the kinds of investigations made with the road accident fund. It's bringing back or even preventing some of the billions that were going to be lost. If you apply stringent measures to those and they can no longer do the work, it's self-defeating. Some of those, the priority of growing the economy and inclusive economy, you may begin to say which are those things which are going to open up some of the things and invest more on those. That applies to the Public Service Commission in its expanded mandate, because we've suffered cuts since 2014 and cumulatively to the tune of 82 million. So with those cuts, you can no longer do more than what you were supposed to do. But understanding that complexity and the situation, we've gone all out to mobilize resources, hence working with the United Nations Development Program and many other potential funders to say, meantime, let's raise funds for some of the programs. But that cannot take away from the allocations which should be given there. We are working now with the Minister of Public Service and Administration to solve this problem of people who have been sitting for years at home with full pay. And once that is solved, it brings money back. We worked with the Minister of Police and worked with the Department of Police to solve the issue of the forensic laboratories, which were having a backlog. And that being resolved meant that cases could be speeded up, meant that some of the cases could be resolved. And we should be asking the question in another way, instead of saying, how much will it cost? What is the cost of not investing in some of these things which ought to address the very priorities of the seventh administration and help the country to recover and thrive later?
Prof, I appreciate your time. Professor Somadoda Fikeni, let's leave it there for tonight. Right in Focus continues with what's making news.